You should hear what keeps him up at night.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Well, he's half right. We do need a wall. You know, to keep out gang members, fentanyl dealers, human traffickers, and Anna Navarro. What's funny, though, is that Stern actually thought that was a compliment. Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one.
Howard Stern forged an empire on pure shock value, a defiant middle finger to the establishment. But when Greg Gutfeld set his sights on the self-proclaimed king of controversy, Stern went completely radio silent. No fiery comeback, no signature rant, just an awkward hush that somehow screamed louder than any words. In a jaw-dropping live segment, Gutfeld didn't just poke at Stern's evolution, he ripped the lid off it, exposing a full-blown sellout. The rebel had become the very system he once battled, and Gutfeld was there to light the match. So, what happens when the uncensored icon gets completely out-rebelled on his own turf?
But that's how Stern can call snacking with celebs at a fancy restaurant exhausting. Exhausting. Like he finished the overnight shift in a coal mine. Or hearing Kat talk about her pets. But I get it, life is tough, especially when you've been cut off from the world for 2 years in a $20 million beach house. I mean, you have no idea how tiring it is walking all the way from the wine cellar to the tennis court and back.
There are TV moments that vanish the second they're over, and then there are those that hit like a meteor, burning themselves into the collective pop culture consciousness. Loud, fiery, and impossible to forget. The recent showdown between Greg Gutfeld and Howard Stern on live television was undeniably one of the latter. This wasn't just a heated debate, it was a seismic cultural collision. Two titans from wildly different media universes smashed into each other, and when the dust settled, only one looked like they still belonged in the stratosphere. For decades, Howard Stern has confidently worn the crown as the king of all media.
But it is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comments, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came. So I call this BFR. It's blackface reparations. There's nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt that he now embraces. So this is a form of restitution. Maybe he says, you know, if I'm woke too, the crocodile will eat me last. But they always do eat. But I get it. He flipped from populist to elitist because
once the undisputed pioneer of shock radio, Stern built his legendary name and massive empire by doing what no one else dared. He was the unapologetically brash voice of rebellion, the unfiltered conscience for a generation utterly fed up with polite society. Stern's very name was synonymous with disruption, defiance, and endless controversy. You either loved him or hated him, but you absolutely could not ignore him. But here's the cold, hard truth about being a rebel king. Stay on that throne too long, and eventually, the edge starts to dull. Over the years, Stern has undergone a slow, almost bizarre transformation.
I will say this, Dagan. I thank God for Howard Stern because he does make me feel normal by comparison. Because I'm like the fox recluse. I don't do anything. I don't go anywhere. But he makes me look like, you know, Pete Davidson on a...
Yeah, he's a germaphobe. Like, his wife rescues cats. That's her job, apparently, her thing. But you can get toxoplasmosis.
That's true.
Cryptosporidiosis.
AIDS.
And
no, you can't.
No,
but
you can't get.
No, you can't.
But you can get.
He's morphed from that unapologetic, in-your-face outsider into a soft-spoken celebrity interviewer comfortably rubbing elbows with Hollywood's elite. The Howard Stern we see today often feels less like the volcanic force he once was, and more like a polished, almost generic talk show host. And that, my friends, is exactly where Greg Gutfeld spotted a glaring, vulnerable crack in the armor. Gutfeld, love him or hate him, has absolutely mastered the art of televised confrontation. The man is part sharp political commentator, part late-night comedic provocateur, and part cultural demolition expert. He doesn't just argue, he dissects, ridicules, and exposes with surgical precision. With his nightly show-blending sarcasm, sharp satire, and stinging commentary, Gutfeld has built his own empire by fearlessly targeting sacred cows and igniting fires where others wouldn't dare to tread. So, when Stern casually, then suddenly, very uncasually popped up in one of Gutfeld's segments, the stage was perfectly set. What started as a fleeting mention quickly escalated into a focused, almost surgical takedown. Gutfeld didn't just question Stern's transformation, he completely dismantled it. He challenged the entire trajectory of Stern's evolution, publicly mocking the man who once thrived on pure chaos for now preaching conformity from his luxurious penthouse studio.
On his radio show, Howard Stern defended wokeism, saying it's a compliment when someone calls him woke. Listen.
If woke means I can't get behind Trump, which is what I think it means, or that I support people who want to be transgender, or I'm for the vaccine, dude.
And let's be crystal clear. This was no throwaway line or offhand jab. Gutfeld leaned into it hard. He deliberately framed Stern not as a fading legend, but as a cautionary tale. The message was unmistakable. Howard Stern, once the fearless iconoclast, had become the exact thing he used to rail against. In Gutfeld's unvarnished world, that's the ultimate cardinal sin. Selling out, toning down, becoming a cog in the very machine you once vowed to smash. There was no shouting, no frothing at the mouth. Instead, Gutfeld sliced with chilling precision, like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. He meticulously contrasted the old Stern, that wild-haired, reckless truth bomber who terrified censors and shredded elites, with the new, meticulously groomed Stern, now cozied up with the very celebrities he once gleefully eviscerated. It was a quiet, gut-wrenching, brutal unraveling of a legacy meticulously built on rebellion, now teetering precariously on the edge of mainstream respectability. The sheer absurdity of it practically wrote itself. Here was the man who built an empire mocking phoniness, now wearing the very mask he used to tear off others. Gutfeld didn't even need to exaggerate. All he had to do was articulate the transformation. The symbolism was devastating. The shock jock who once spat on the red carpet had now rolled it out for himself.
But Stern being holed up in his house that long, it explains a lot of things, like how you forget how other people live, especially in hard times like a pandemic. For the longest time, 2 years in fact, the same time Stern's been AWOL, I wondered where he went. Not physically, but mentally. I bet you did too. Remember his screeds about COVID? They were epic and angry, and not to mention, wrong.
When are we going to stop putting up with the idiots in this country and just say, it's mandatory to get vaccinated? F them, f their freedom. I want my freedom.
The guy who once wore defiance like a badge of honor now seemed consumed by the desperate need for approval. Hollywood approval, corporate approval, mainstream approval. What made Gutfeld's attack land with such crushing force was the context itself. Gutfeld's show thrives on irreverence, on gleefully turning sacred cows into ground beef. So when he aimed at Stern, it wasn't just another petty celebrity feud. It was a generational indictment, one voice accusing another of completely losing its soul. This punch wasn't merely personal, it was profoundly philosophical. And Stern, for once, had absolutely no comeback. No fireworks, no devastating takedown of his own, just a deafening, thunderous silence. Gutfeld didn't need to win the exchange in a traditional sense. The fact that it landed so cleanly, and that the public immediately recognized something undeniably truthful in it, was the real victory. Stern, once the guy who called everyone out, was finally the one being called out. And this time, it stuck. Viewers watched in real time as Gutfeld painted Stern as nothing more than a ghost of his former self. It wasn't loud or belligerent. It was sharp, cold, and utterly cutting, striking a nerve not just with fans of either figure, but with anyone who has witnessed a once revolutionary voice slowly fade into comfortable irrelevance. The contrast between these two media figures couldn't have been more vivid.
Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Oh my God.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave. I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about. This is a guy who once joked right after the Columbine massacre that the killers should have raped the students before killing them. Not that I like that, Stern, but this pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You gotta wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate.
Stern built his legacy in an era when truly breaking the rules meant hefty fines from the FCC, getting banned from networks, and being screamed at by furious sponsors. Yet, that very resistance fueled his power. Gutfeld, on the other hand, rose to prominence in an age defined by cancel culture, rabid outrage mobs, and instant social media takedowns, the new digital forms of censorship. He learned to fight with razor-sharp sarcasm instead of crude swear words, with surgical ridicule instead of raw shock value. In so many ways, the Gutfeld-Stern showdown wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a full-blown battle between two distinct eras of media. Gutfeld embodies the modern digital insurgency, slick, sarcastic, meme-ready rebellion that thrives on exposing hypocrisy in rapid-fire 30-second viral bursts. And the audience? They watched it all unfold like a high-stakes courtroom drama with no judge, just two gladiators and millions of viewers waiting to declare a winner. What truly stung for Stern was how effortlessly Gutfeld pulled back the curtain. He didn't attack Stern's past, he actually praised it. The real insult, the deepest cut, was in the brutal comparison.
Happy Friday, America! Oh man, tonight is a special night. It's Feminine Friday, where all the panelists are women. Tonight we have Kennedy, David McDowell, Pat Tim, and Janine Garofalo. All right. A long way for a meat joke. Okay, I hope you had a good week. I did, and no thanks to Howard Stern. True, the New York Post reported that Stern hit a chic restaurant in NYC with a crew of A-listers, including Jimmy Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, Jon Hamm, Justin Theroux, Jason Bateman. I was not invited. I guess
the old Stern, Gutfeld implied, would have absolutely torn apart the sanitized version of himself that now casually appears on satellite radio and late-night talk shows, sporting designer hoodies. That vintage Stern wouldn't have even recognized the man who now waxes philosophical with Hollywood elites or conducts softball interviews with A-listers as if he were on a charity telethon. To Gutfeld, Stern had transitioned from a cultural sniper, a precision attacker, to a placid media monk. Polished, manicured, and far too comfortable with the very system he once worked so hard to dismantle. And once that damning image took hold, it was impossible to unsee. The aftermath was instantaneous. Social media exploded with clips, commentary, and reactions from every corner of the internet. The clip didn't go viral because of some outrageous new statement. It went viral because Gutfeld had articulated what a vast number of former Stern fans had been quietly thinking for years, but never dared to voice aloud. It also ignited much bigger questions. Can anyone truly remain a rebel forever?
Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Is it truly inevitable that every firebrand eventually becomes a part of the establishment they once so fiercely despised? Or, even worse, do they eventually start defending that establishment once their own seat at the table is finally secure? Gutfeld seemed to argue that Stern's problem wasn't merely that he had changed, it was how he changed. Not through a genuine ideological shift, but through calculated self-preservation. The man who once boldly claimed to fear nothing now seemed desperate to appease everyone. The shock jock who once mercilessly mocked celebrity culture now appeared utterly obsessed with being accepted by it. And in Gutfeld's sharp view, that kind of transformation isn't genuine growth. It's a complete and total surrender. Ironically, Stern's resounding silence in the immediate aftermath only amplified the damage. The man who once thrived on confrontation, who built an entire career out of obliterating critics with lightning-fast comebacks, suddenly vanished. It created the undeniable impression, fair or not, that Stern simply had nothing left in the tank, that he'd been completely caught off guard, and maybe, deep down, he even agreed with the scathing criticism.
This definition of woke, it's if you call someone a know-it-all, you're not complimenting them on the breadth of their knowledge. Yeah. You're saying you don't know as much as you think you know. So, yeah, woke doesn't have anything to do with vaccines. What it really means is sort of a slavish devotion to left-wing ideology and then repeating it so you can get social credit.
Right.
That's really what it means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're smarter than anybody. And he had said in another part of this set, because I believe in the science. Well, if you believed in the science, you wouldn't be hiding out like Howard Hughes in your mansion. So
Viewers who once admired his raw fire were left scratching their heads, wondering where that legendary edge had simply vanished. It wasn't just that he didn't respond, it felt like he couldn't respond. Gutfeld threw a clean, hard punch, and Stern didn't even flinch, not in defiance, but in apparent confusion. In an industry built entirely on immediate reaction and meticulous narrative control, Stern's striking failure to respond wasn't just a missed opportunity. It felt like quiet, definitive confirmation. Meanwhile, Gutfeld continued on, almost smugly, like a man who knew his punch had landed perfectly. He didn't need to gloat. The internet was doing all the heavy lifting for him. Thousands of comments, viral retweets, and countless YouTube reactions did more to validate his critique than any follow-up monologue ever could. What made the entire situation even more fascinating was that Gutfeld wasn't just attacking some random celebrity. He was aiming at someone who, for decades, literally defined the very act of attacking others. Howard Stern had built his entire career on fearlessly targeting hypocrisy, ego, and phoniness. This wasn't just celebrity gossip or late-night drama. It was a mirror held up directly to the idea of legacy itself. Stern was being forced to reckon with the enormous weight of his own history. That, my friends, is the true curse of being a legend. Your past self inevitably becomes the measuring stick. And if you fall short, no one is more brutal than your former fans.
I always hate that argument, like, what happened to the old Stern, or what people have changed. That's not what this is about. It's a weird disconnect.
Well, he hasn't changed.
No.
People have been calling him insane for 40 years.
Yeah.
That just used to be, this guy's nuts. And now they're like, oh, we're worried about Howard. He needs help. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, though, I'm a little sympathetic because what you said is correct, but I'm also a germaphobe.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just have a smaller apartment. Yes. So it's like
The entire exchange, whether overtly planned or not, felt like a scathing commentary on the media industry at large, a stark mirror reflecting its slow, painful decay. Gutfeld's meteoric rise wasn't accidental. It was built on the very traits Stern once embodied, but now appears to have completely buried. Unfiltered humor, relentless defiance, and absolutely zero regard for polished corporate narratives. While legacy media stumbles under the suffocating weight of self-censorship and hypersensitive corporate dictates, Gutfeld has effortlessly filled that gaping vacuum with bold, brash commentary that genuinely resonates. He taps directly into that deep hunger for authenticity that Stern once so powerfully fed. But where Stern now opts for soft glove interviews and the fleeting promise of social acceptance, Gutfeld charges forward reckless and raw. In this crumbling media landscape, it's not just a battle of personalities, it's a seismic changing of the guard. It's less about politics and more about authenticity, or at least the compelling perception of it. And in that pivotal moment on live television, Gutfeld looked undeniably like the more authentic voice, the man truly willing to say the unsayable, even if it meant going after a certified legend. Stern, by stark contrast, looked like he was still desperately clinging to a reputation that no longer matched his comfortable, compromised reality.
Striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate. But maybe that's the explanation. This is Stern's self-imposed penance for subjugating women to demoralizing stunts, capitalizing on desperate females thirsting for attention, even if it's from an oily paddle striking their bare.
Whether or not that's truly fair isn't even the point. In media, perception is reality. The pressing question now is, what happens next? Does Stern find a way to reclaim his infamous edge and prove the critics spectacularly wrong? Or does he continue down this polished, professional path that might make him more palatable, but undeniably less powerful? And does Gutfeld, now clearly unafraid to relentlessly punch up, become the new, unapologetic face of unfiltered commentary in a world absolutely desperate for it? One thing is for certain, the torch has been passed. Or perhaps it was unceremoniously snatched. Either way, the epic showdown between Greg Gutfeld and Howard Stern wasn't just another fleeting media moment. It was a significant cultural shift, a generational handoff, a public reckoning for a man who, for decades, was the reckoning. And whether you love or hate either of them, you absolutely felt it. You knew something fundamental had changed. Because that's what happens when a king gets brazenly called out by the court jester, especially when that jester is sharper, faster, and still fiercely hungry for the fight.